But
can they hear us now? Anyone? Hello? Hello? Can you hear us? Yeah, we know we're muted. It's driving me nuts, this is.
I've turned the audio up on my YouTube, so I'll hear it if we start to come through.
Okay.
There's a video called OBS No Sound Fix.
Can they hear
I
us
think we might be
now?
coming through now.
Anyone? Hello? Hello? Can you
Yeah,
hear
we're coming
us?
through now, mate. Yeah.
Yeah, we know we're muted. Oh, it's working, is it?
Very well.
Whee! It can hear us. That was a great start. Hello,
Okay.
everyone. Let's start again, shall we? So we can cut it from this point for the pod. Hello, everyone. Welcome to inspectedGoals episode 2. Finally over our issues there with the sound. I don't know what that was. Forgive us. It's the first time. They finally let us loose and we messed it up straight away. But Sam, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks, mate. Doing well. Glad that's sorted. I was very excited to go live, and now excited to go live for a second time in one night. I'm good, yeah, in terms of FPL. I have, yeah, kind of got to a point where I've got a first draft now, as in a team that I'm like happy with, I guess, for the first time, which is good. So we're looking forward to talking through that today.
Absolutely, yeah. You sent it to me and you hadn't seen mine, had you? And I just chuckled when I saw it, to be honest, but we'll get to that in a bit. We're conscious we want to keep this quite short, guys. We want to try and aim for 45 minutes, like we said. That's the aim of this pod, to make it succinct. Whether we're going to manage it is another fact. But I'm going to fire straight into some other bits before we get to the draft very quickly. Just some stuff that I like from my mate FPL Chase, which I'm going to bring up here. Which he's posted on Twitter. And again, I've recommended him all the time to follow him. So at FPL_Chase. And it's just, for the purposes of the pod, it's probably easier to describe it as a non-penalty XG rolling 10-game average in the EPL 21-22. So that's a mouthful. Basically, it's got all the teams. As you can see here, it's sorted by the very far right column, which is the XG they provided in the date below. And the date is the month. So it's taken all of the games from that month, which will usually be 4. Sometimes it could be 3 or 5, depending on what it is. And then to level it out, he's then taken the remaining to make up 10 from the previous month. So it gives you that rolling feel of the XG across the months. So in May, if there was 3 or 4 games, obviously the rest were made up by the games just before in April, sort of the 6 or 7 before. And then he's also taken into account the strength of the opponent here. So they've scaled the XG depending on the level of opponents they've had. So obviously if Man City played Norwich, they should have an extremely high XG, you would expect. Whereas if they played Liverpool, probably not as high. So the thing that stood out to me straight away here, and it's not particularly rocket science, is that the top teams are very, very good. This has just been scaled, but you can still see there they are churning out very, very good numbers. And remember, this is taken into account the fixtures. So it's just a reminder for me that I like that. It might not necessarily carry on to seasons. We know things can change. Managers can change. The makeup of the squad can change. But these very good teams are very good, the obvious ones, and we really should be trying to focus there where we can. So this is for the XG. This is for the XG conceded, sorted again by the most recent month. Again, we can see Man City right at the top on this graph, literally not hitting any point for XG conceded across the month, across the whole season. Their defence is extremely, extremely good. And down the bottom, obviously, we've got the worst teams as you'd expect. When we go for the combined, which is XG difference between conceded and obviously XG, this gives you a feel you can almost sort of relate it to form a little bit, I guess. So I really don't like form, but you can kind of say, well, if there's a baseline for what they should be achieving, and this is how they're managing to overperform constantly, it's essentially Man City and Liverpool are pretty much always in form. That's what that's kind of saying to me.
Yeah.
The other notable thing that I take from it is that you can see between each month there will be slight fluctuations, but quite often if there is like a little dip or whatever, it does come back again quite a way around. So I think that's important when you do see a lot of hyperbole on Twitter and stuff. Oh, Liverpool are playing terrible at the moment, or Man City are playing terrible. They've had 2 games back to back and they don't look quite at it. I think this shows that they get back at it very, very quickly. It doesn't often continue. Is there anything else you take from that? I mean, the thing is, all this data is great, But often with data, it's how you interpret it, right? And that's how I interpret it. It could be wrong, but that's the feeling I get from it.
Yeah, there's just a couple of interesting things I think I'd add to that, which is what you mentioned there about form. It's often discussed in a jokey way as well on Twitter, if you're on FPL Twitter, about whether form like exists. And I think the problem with that conversation is when people discuss it, they're discussing different things. So it's definitely true that teams go through periods when they play better and periods when they play worse. And it's about working out whether there's a reason for that, whether it's fixtures, whether it's completely random and to do with luck, or whether there's an obvious change. So someone's put in the chat, capital FPL Spurs XG came from when Conte came in.
Yeah.
And so you could say, oh, Spurs have been in form from there, and some people would use that language. And if you're referring to they've got better because they've got a new manager, then of course that is a thing. So I think looking at trends and dips and changes, but you're looking at a decent sample size is helpful. You've got to identify what's potentially caused that. And you don't have to, with this as well, you don't even have to think about opposition because that's accounted for as well, which is usually the thing that dictates what we call form, whether it's for an individual player or a team. So I think it's interesting to think of it from that point of view. And the second thing I would say is just when you look at the teams that are at the top for the difference and the conceded and the scored, it sounds really obvious, but they're the teams that ultimately we should be building our FPL teams around. So
absolutely. And although it's great, like we can look back and it almost tells the picture, like you picked up there on the Conte straight away. You can literally see from when Conte's come in there or thereabouts, Spurs have just been transformed. And then we can also look at Arsenal and we can see that at the beginning of the season they weren't quite up to it, and then they got progressively better and better. Does that translate onto next season? Or is there any reason why that might change? These are other conversations that come out of it, right? But yeah, I just really like them, and I think that helps when we're building our teams and our drafts for me to bear in mind that, like, yes, there's individual players, etc., that I might like from certain teams, but sometimes I feel like every individual pick, of course, might have a caveat. Like the expected minutes is the issue with a lot of these top teams, right? And that what ends up leveling the playoff field somewhat. But I think if they were given the minutes, for a lot of these teams, the top players, then there'd almost be a no-brainer. So it's good to bear in mind. I think that if you can nail those expected minutes, which is the hardest thing to do, I think these days, to have an advantage, then you're in for a winner if you can get one of those guys from the top teams and get those minutes right.
Definitely, yeah.
Should we move on to your team?
Just quickly, Luke, like another application from what someone said there in the replies is Southampton look like a relegation team. And that's a perfect example. You can see how they've got worse in those last few months of the season. And then you've got to work out, well, is there a reason for that? And also, is there a reason that will have changed during off-season? So I think that's a perfect example of when you've got to try and establish that, and when maybe just a team's finishing position might not be reflective of how good they are at present, even at a time like this.
Yeah, and injuries as well, right? Because we do know for some teams, some players can be absolutely key to the way they set up and stuff, and they seem to have an effect. In some teams more than others. Wolves, I think, as well, are another one to stand out there. Previously, they had pretty good data to begin of the season, and in past seasons they've been pretty good in terms of defence. But there was just a big dip off for Wolves. And has their squad changed much? Doesn't look like it to me at the moment. So yeah, it's stuff like that to bear in mind. Should we move on to your draft? Should we get to it? That's what everyone's here for. So basically, I've been lazy and I've told Sam to do all the work, pick his team and talk about it. I'm going to speak about his team, and when we get to my team, you'll probably realise why we've done it that way as well. So I'm going to bring up Sam's team here on the screen, hopefully. There we go. So do you want to say who's in it first of all, Sam, just for the purposes of the pod?
Yeah, so for the purpose of the pod, in goal is Sanchez. In defence is Cancelo, Trent Alexander-Arnold, Reece James, Ben Chilwell and Gabriel from Arsenal. In midfield, Martinelli, Salah and Diaz with a Z. Then up front, Jesus and Haaland. On the bench, Steele from Brighton, Archer, De Silva and Andreas Pereira.
Yeah, very, very much similar to some of the teams I'm seeing on Twitter. You won't be surprised to hear or know yourself, I'd imagine. Looks really good to me. So do you want to talk us through it, why you've gone for certain picks, so we can pick up some things?
Yeah, shall we go from back to front?
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, we discussed goalkeepers for quite a long time last week, actually, so we can just touch on it. Um, I do think that Edison and Allison are really good value at 5.5. Um, I just found that every time I tried to put Edison into my team, who is the other keeper I would go for, is the keeper I'd go for at that price,
Mm.
every time I tried to put him in, there would just be another uh, player within the team, an outfield player that I feel like the difference I can make up with that 1 million was bigger than upgrading the goalkeeper. And I guess that's particularly the case with having a very cheap bench. So as soon as I went for Edison over Sanchez, suddenly there's a player I'm playing outfield that I don't really want to play.
Hmm.
So for example, it's a drop Diaz. There's not many 7 million players I like. There's not many players cheaper than Martinelli that you want to be having in your team regularly. And I just think with the defenders, there's so much value with those attacking defenders.
Hmm.
And so I'd rather I've got four of those, keep four of those, and have Sanchez instead. And then in terms of Sanchez versus others, I just because of how good Brighton's defence was last year, I prefer Sanchez and I prefer his fixtures to Raya and to Meslier or Melier. In fact, no, I probably do prefer Leeds fixtures actually, but I just don't trust their defence as much.
Yeah.
So that's the reason I've gone for Sanchez. And I do appreciate though that Brighton could be worse defensively without Basuma in their team this year. So it's an interesting one. And something I would say just generally on goalkeepers is that I don't think it's good to buy keepers for save points, because then ultimately you're buying a keeper. Say you look at a keeper and you see they had a lot of save points last year. You're ultimately buying a keeper whose team conceded a lot of shots. I think the key thing is the fundamental thing of how many clean sheets are they likely to get, because save points are far less predictable in my opinion. And maybe we saw that last season a bit with Martinez from Villa. The season before he was unbelievable, and then just suddenly this season he just wasn't an option. I think
No.
even if he'd been at 4.5, he wasn't near some of the other keepers.
No.
So maybe that was just a bit of randomness that he had like a few games where he hauled with incredible saves. Maybe it was the way they played that season. I don't know, but it's less predictable.
I think it is important to take into account the team they're in and the way the defenders pass, because we know how the bonus system's set up. It can often favour keepers, I think, when the defenders are basically useless in terms of most of the things that trigger for the bonus points, which is like over 30 passes is one that I know of, and creativity and stuff can also affect it. So I do think that's relatively important. I still wouldn't put it as important as clean sheets, no, but I think therefore when you have the likes of Martinez and Pope for Burnley, they have at least got that opportunity where if they do string some clean sheets and they do make a few saves, everything else is set up around them where they're going to be the main benefit from the bonus points. But basing your goalkeeper just off of bonus points, yeah. I mean, it's incredibly hard to do. If it was easy, then we'd all pick the perfect goalkeeper every season, and we just go with that. And there has been seasons where that's happened, where it's like, oh, this one probably looks the best. And Martinez looked brilliant after I think game week 2, and it became fairly obvious. But it's not always that way. I'm with you. I'm stuck on something. Before we even get to my team, I said it last time. I'm on Sanchez as well. So
Interesting.
yeah, talk us through the defence.
I'll just with Trent first. Just absolutely picked himself. Honestly, I don't can't believe I even need to explain it.
No.
Just because, I shouldn't need to. It's good to explain it, but you've got a player who, if you look at FPL review, he's expected to get the fourth most points in the first 6 game weeks. He got more than 200 points last season, and has got close to that or over that over the last few seasons. He was the third highest scoring player in the whole game last season. His expected goal involvement last year was 0.44, so you're expecting an attacking return almost every other game. He's got the highest expected assists in the whole league last season, including players who aren't defenders, per 90. And then he gets clean sheets as well. It's ludicrous that he costs 8 million or
7.5.
7 is he? Yeah, 7.5. Yeah, that's just honestly, I just think it's just a complete no-brainer to own him. And I don't think Robertson's anywhere near to him, to be honest. Even though his points were very close to him last season. I think if you look at the underlying data, particularly with expected assists, Trent is well clear of him.
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you want to add anything to that, Luke?
No, the only thing is just that I think that there's a chance we haven't seen his peak yet. I think there's a chance, given the age of him, given the fact that you can only assume he's going to therefore improve as a player. The fact that you could get a little bit lucky where he doesn't historically score that many goals, but he does take quite a few set pieces. You know, there's seasons sometimes where a player will score 5 free kicks, you know, out of complete randomness. So maybe we can add that in there. Maybe losing Mane, you could say, because he's very good with his head. Could that affect Trent a little bit? But then we've got Núñez who's come in, who, if he playing, he looks like he's certainly built that way. I don't know that much about him in the way that you'd expect that he would be good in the air. So yeah, it all starts to go down narratives at this point, isn't it? I don't see that affecting him too much. There could be an adjustment period for Liverpool in general, just losing Mane and having Núñez in. I don't doubt that for a second, but will that have an effect on Trent to the level where I'm not going to pick him? Absolutely not.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything else I need to add to that, to be honest,
No.
Luke. I just think if you're listening to this now and you don't have him in your team, just go and put him in your team. Whatever downgrade you have to do elsewhere to get him in, if you don't own him, will be worth it. Shall I move to the Chelsea boys next? Yeah, so I've gone for double Chelsea defence. Ben Chilwell and Reece James. This is one where I wouldn't be surprised if I end up starting the season with just one of them. It depends on, with Chilwell, I guess that's the one that depends on how confident I am in his minutes, just because he's not played a competitive game, has he, since, in months, in over half a year.
What, Chilwell? He played the last game, I think, at the end of last season.
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
Oh, did he? Yeah. Did he start that? Yeah.
I can't remember if he started, but I remember him featuring. Yeah.
Yeah.
But still, he's not been playing for a high level for a little while because he's obviously had that injury, hasn't he? So, yeah.
Yeah, and James, I'm pretty certain I'll end up owning James. It's just, with both of them, I guess it comes down to minutes. But it's just the fact that their upside is ridiculously high. Like, they have it in them to get 20 points. Like, they can get a clean sheet and 2 assists, or like 3 attacking returns, even if a couple of times a season, if Chelsea win 7-0 or something, like they are capable of doing that. So I think that you have that as a possibility for a player who's only 6. I think it's well worth having them. They are players I think are probably at risk of getting subbed off before the 60th minute, and have been in the past as well. Particularly, we saw that trend with James last season. I think it was last season, quite early in the season. There was a couple of times he got taken off at half time. So that can happen, but I just think, the opening fixtures are good enough to go for that. And just in general, there's just a lot of value overall in the more expensive defenders.
Yeah. Any concerns over obviously losing Rudiger? I think that's what as people were saying. You know, they've lost Rudiger. I know they've bought in Koulibaly, and I think they're getting the lad from Seville as well. I don't know where it looks like they might be, Koundé. So do you think there's going to be any adjustment period there? Because we have seen it in the past, haven't we, where good defenders have come to this league and not necessarily just hit the ground running straight away, or just players in general. I think you can apply that to. So do you have any concerns there at all? Like that, therefore, I mean, we even saw it with Rudiger, to be fair, at the back end of the season for Chelsea. Some games they were pretty horrific defensively. So do you have any concerns at all around that?
I guess so. Yeah, definitely. But they're replacing with a good defender, and Rudiger was exceptional. Also, but I still think overall they're very likely to have one of the best defenses in the league still. And it's just even if their defense is just okay, like it's that combination of that attacking threat. I guess that's the key thing. So I'm not definitely set on those two, but I'm pretty sure they'll be at my team. It comes down to minutes, and it comes down as well to Perisic. If I feel like Perisic is fit and I can save 0.5 there by replacing one of them with him, that's somewhere else I can upgrade. Also, if I feel like that's worth it. So that's something it might come down to as well.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Gabriel's interesting to me. Just because, he's one of the players that I didn't have in my team. I like him in Sky quite a lot, but in FPL, I've never been 100% sure. So talk me through that one.
Yeah, it's definitely the most rogue pick within the team. So I've got 5. I've got 5 to spend on that last defender spot. Honestly, I don't think I'll start the season with Gabriel, but I wanted to put him in for now. The reason I don't think I will is because Zinchenko, I think, is on the verge, if not announced yet, for Arsenal. And there's a chance that Cucurella could go to Man City. And I think I'll probably prefer both of those two, particularly particularly Cucurella if he can play regularly because of the quality of defence he's signing for. But the reason I would go for Gabriel over, I think he's worth a 0.5 over Tomiyasu, for example, is additional goal threat. Tomiyasu is not really that attacking as a defender. I know a lot of people own him. And I much prefer him over White. White doesn't have any goal threat at all. And so, yeah, last season, Gabriel scored 5 goals from an XG of 2.7. So he overachieved on that bit. I think because the majority of his goals are going to come from set pieces, that's quite hard to predict, isn't it? Anyway, I think that probably with those types of goals, you see more of a discrepancy between XG and goals. And I definitely have a massive bias towards Gabriel as well, just being totally honest. So I owned him from like game week 26 until the end. And Arsenal, I owned him from that wild card until the end. I had double Arsenal defence for ages, and Arsenal's defence was so poor at the end of the season. Well, they kept conceding goals, but Gabriel scored like maybe 3 goals in the last 6 or 7 game weeks, and every time he scored, like he was less than 1% owned at my rank. So I like him for that reason, but that's not a good reason to own him.
I was going to say he's charmed you, hasn't he?
He's definitely he charmed me.
Yeah, I do like that spot though at 5 million. I think you touched on it there. Doherty is another one where it looks like maybe Jed Spence is, from Conte's comments, isn't preferred choice to begin the season with. At least that's what I read between the lines. I think most people did. I think Doherty was, when he was fit, he was playing, and I think he's probably an upgrade on Emerson in terms of the way that Conte wants to use the wing backs. So he looks like a good option at 5. Even if it doesn't last for long or whatever. He looks good. And then you mentioned obviously Cucurella there, Zinchenko potentially as well. And then I think, well, if the Cucurella thing doesn't happen, then we've got Walker at 5 million. If they've only got Cancelo and Walker really as first choice fullbacks, I think you'll use Ake at left back as he has done in the past versus some of the bruisers, which means that probably Walker might drop out for Cancelo right back. So you might not get every game out of Walker. He is getting on a bit. But to begin the season at 5 million, if Cucurella hasn't gone there, he looks like a reasonable option to me as well. So it's it's one of those ones where you design your team and then obviously we'll play around with it as the news comes in, I guess, won't we? And how the updates come from minutes played and stuff. Because I think you said Tomiyasu there as well. The last I heard, he had a little bit of a knock. So people who've got them in a team probably have to look at that.
In general, he's just quite injury prone in general, isn't he? So far since he's joined the league, although played well when he has played. The thing is interesting, I think, with Cucurella and Zinchenko, there's just an interesting study or thing to think about is Cucurella. If you were to just look at like threat in terms of underlying data, so expected goal involvement, and let's say take expected assists, he'll look a lot worse than Zinchenko. So you've got to but they're kind of both doing the reverse thing. So you've got Zinchenko, whose expected assists per 90 is something like it's close to 0.2. It's like 0.18 or 1.19, something like that. So really, but pretty good. Yeah, good. But he's moving to a team where most likely, he'll have worse players around him ultimately. So most likely he'll create less chances. And then you've got Cucurella doing the opposite, where his expected assists are lower, but probably good for a team like Brighton. And he's suddenly moving to a team managed by Pep Guardiola with incredible players around him. So you've got to try and work out, how much do each of them increase and decrease in terms of their threats, and then add on top of that minutes, of course, and then obviously the fact that Cucurella is joining a far better defence. So I think that's really interesting to see. If you were to look at their underlying data at the end of the season, if they do both make those moves, how much that's changed season on season.
That's something I'm just really interested in general, is how a player's individuals' underlying data translate when they move teams. Can you just instantly say they're going to be a better or worse option? You got stuff like Jack Grealish last season. I know that his expected data was still good, but he went for a very good player into a very good team, and a lot of people would start at the beginning of the season with and just thought he'd be fantastic, and I think he was good in a lot of ways, but in terms of actual FPL returns, it wasn't particularly good, was it? So it's hard to know on those accounts, and I don't know if there's any magic formula out there that can judge that better than just gut feel. I'm assuming there is, but it just seems a very hard thing to pin down. My gut feel would be that Cucurella in a Man City team, if he was playing and nailed on, would be an extremely good pick.
Sorry, something that's interesting about Grealish. Sorry, I know we're going off the draft here. Just to mention very briefly, is he actually spoke about this, and if you watch his post-match interview on the pitch after City won the title, and he's talking about a season, he talks about the fact that there's such a focus on Man City of just don't lose the ball.
Yeah.
That he would get the ball, and he's very he's far more conservative, less likely to be creative and try and play players on because he's told to keep the ball. So I think he's just restricted more at Man City. He's not suddenly got worse at dribbling. In fact, his dribbling stats are still really good, but he just doesn't do it as much, I guess. And also there was a bit of bad luck, I think, in terms of if you look at his like the big chances he created.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he had a lot of bad luck if you're watching the games. A lot of the time it was just off the line, just all sorts of that stuff that just happened. He constantly had his hands in his head, not by any fault of his own quite often. Yeah, no, I totally agree. And Pep even said in the media all season, I use Grealish if I need to control the game a bit more. So that's basically telling you because I don't want him to lose the ball. Yeah,
and he wins fouls is another good way of controlling a game. Is get free kicks and slow it down.
Definitely. Should we rock on to midfielders? Yeah.
We've actually not discussed Cancelo, I think, but I can do it very briefly, like I did with Trent.
Yeah, go on.
I don't think this definitely isn't as straightforward as Trent, but still, ultimately, last season he got over 200 points, and he cost 7. And if you looked at, so he was at his, again, we touched on it last week, but in general, if you look at his expected goals, there. You would expect him to probably score 4 goals last season. It's about 4 expected goals for the season, but he didn't score, I don't think, last season in the league.
He scored 1, I think. Yeah,
he scored 1, okay. Yeah, so if you add on those 6, 12, 18 points, he would have been the 3rd highest scoring player in the game last season, ahead of Trent. So that's interesting. And I wonder, so if you look at FPL Review and the expected points, now their massive data model isn't out yet, so they've just got their free model out, I believe. Is that right, Luke, for now?
Yeah, I think it's going to launch about a week before the season starts.
Their free model takes into account more actual output, and their massive data model takes into account more underlying data. So I think he's also not as high on FPL Review at the moment, but I imagine we'll see that switch when more of the data is taken into account and we see his expected points. So I think that's interesting as well. And then something I was going to ask you about him actually, Luke, is I've heard people say that they think the reason he underperformed his XG so much is because he shoots so much from distance. And so if you generate a really high XG, but so many of your shots from outside the box, and maybe you're not particularly good at scoring from outside the box, like, is it inevitable that you'll underperform it, do you think?
Or no. I mean,
or do you not buy into that at all?
I mean, maths is not my best subject. From what I understand, 1 chance at 1 XG is the same as 100 at 0.1. It is going to end up the same. It ends up to be the same factor. It doesn't really matter how it happens. The only thing I'll say on that is with Haaland, presumably when he's starting and playing, and Pep's comments around we need to get the ball in the box for this guy. That's where I think Cancelo is going to benefit, because he is very, very good at finding those runs, being direct, and potentially being the crosser. If he's at right back, for example, and he's on his right foot, will he be going outside because we've got Mahrez on the right with his left foot, or Foden potentially at the right side with his left foot? They don't have a right-sided right winger. I touched on this the other day. So presumably the right back, be that Walker or Cancelo, has to go on the outside. Now, how do you get crosses in for Cancelo or the ball in the box? It doesn't necessarily mean crosses, does it? But you would expect that's the kind of thing he's talking about. You're going to have the width from the fullbacks, I think, a lot more. So, yeah, I think that's one way that could benefit Cancelo, because he could be put through for the final cutback or pass to the likes of Haaland. But also because he takes all those shots, they have to occasionally hit the bar, ping off the keeper, do whatever. And presumably Haaland is going to be in the box if they're trying to get the ball in the box for him, which is something they haven't always had. So is he suddenly going to start getting a load of fantasy assists? Those knockbacks, those pingbacks, maybe. It's all conjecture at this point. We're still far too far off to see how it rolls. But all I know is I'm starting with Cancelo. I think especially when we touch on the fact that the centre-backs at the moment, like I mentioned last week actually, their minutes are a little bit more in doubt at the moment, just around their injuries as well, who's going to be first choice. So I think you're actually getting a little bit more nailedness for your money as well, which previously wasn't the case. It was almost switched around the other way. So that's why I'm happy to pay the extra money, because I think you'll play all the games.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. The only thing that thing you initially said about 100 shots at 0.01 XG, etc. I understand that completely, and I understand that XG takes into account thousands and thousands of matches in the past. But if you have a player who has a bad skill set when it comes from shooting from distance, and they tend to shoot a lot from distance, you would expect them to underperform to XG. I guess.
Yeah.
But you're saying that's probably not the case with Cancelo.
Well, it will
we just
be.
don't know really.
It will be. Obviously, XG is just the average person that would do it from that position, isn't it? It's not based on who is actually taking that shot. So yes, you could have people who will overperform and underperform. Presumably, there are people who are better than long shots than others. I mean, you almost instinctively can say that. But do I think Cancelo's a bad long shooter? No, I don't think he is at all.
No,
don't think he is. Yeah, I think he's fine. I think he's absolutely fine. So yeah, I don't have any concerns there.
The season before last, he scored a couple of great goals from outside the box. I remember because I didn't own him.
Yeah,
for one of his holds.
I mean, it's hard to score goals from outside the box. That's why they're so celebrated, right? They are extremely hard, and that's their low XG chances for a reason. It doesn't, it does matter to a slight extent who it is. There's people who've made careers out of doing it, but all in all, I don't think there's that much outside variance, to be honest. If you're a professional footballer in an attacking position and you can take long shots, yes, like if you're Messi and other people, there are certain levels to it. But in general, there is a quite average, isn't there, for your average player? I'd say doing it across the board.
Yeah, and I will say is like the reason we're talking about outside the box is because that's what you hear a lot of people say in general. Like it's just I get really frustrated when people talk about how many shots players have had inside the box or outside the box. It's an arbitrary like square that's just designed. It was invented for football over 100 years ago. That's an area we've decided that if you're fouled there, you win a penalty. And then people take into account shots inside the box, and you could have one from a really tight angle, and a better chance would be just outside the box, but centrally. I don't know. Just randomly came to mind. I'm sure we'll discuss that in depth at one point.
It's similar to playing number 9, being up front, but then really being the person who creates the space and runs wide for the inside forwards to score. It's that whole antiquated feeling there. I think that we're all guilty of at times. You see that player standing right up top and you think, oh yeah, he looks like he's the one to score goals, but the system might not be designed that way.
Yeah. The worst is when you hear a commentator describe a player as a false 9 when they're just a
9.
Just playing a 9, but they don't normally play as a 9. Yeah. You hear it all the time with Sterling will sometimes play for Man City, and sometimes he'll just be playing as a 9. But because he doesn't normally play there, he gets described as a false 9, or Havertz as well. Mm-hmm. But anyway, 2 random pet peeves there. Should we move on to midfield, Luke?
Yeah, we are 37 minutes in, but I think some of that was taken up by the audio. So yeah, we'll have to try and crack on with the midfield. It's so hard to keep this succinct. Sure. It really is.
We're 30 minutes in.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah. So Martinelli first. It's just, to be honest, based on his underlying data being really good, and it's even better than Saka's. If you look at his expected goal involvement, excluding penalties. And so it just comes down to minutes, and I just think it was really clear last year that Martinelli was just first choice. So even when Smith Rowe went on that run where he kept scoring when he was coming off the bench, he always started the next game with Martinelli. So I think that he's first choice within that team, and I think he could be on penalties, but I don't know for sure. But I think there's a good chance he will be, because when he's on the pitch, he tends to take them. And then there was one time when Saka scored a penalty and Martinelli was on the pitch, but he'd only come on in stoppage time, which we discussed already. So I think I also feel quite bullish. Like I feel confident in his minutes as well, probably compared to most people. So I think I'd probably increase those compared to what they currently are on FPL review, which is important.
Absolutely. I think with Martinelli, it literally comes down to expected minutes, and I think our judgment on that is key, and it's key for so many players. But I think if you were to say to virtually anyone that Martinelli's going to play the majority of them, and I think he will get subbed quite often, but let's say he plays 70, 80 minutes, they'd have him in the team. I think they would, because the price is too good, I think, for what he potentially offers. I'm personally happy to take the chance, more so because Smith Rowe appears to have a bit of an injury knock and stuff at the moment. I'm not as convinced as you that he is just like first choice. I'd really like him to be, and he's in my team on that wish. But I'm not like... For me, it's a risk to own him, but it's also a risk not to own him. Like, that's the way I like to look at it. Everyone's saying, I'm not having Martinelli because he's too risky on minutes. Well, I want to throw that back at them and say, well, if he is getting the minutes, then you're in trouble, mate. So that's the way I'm choosing to look at it, and I could quite easily get that wrong. But I think there are other players potentially below that will emerge, or are already quite well known, that you could move to if required. So I'm happy to take that punt, because I feel similar to you, like the rest of my team is reasonably solid. So it's like, yeah, I'll take it somewhere. I think when you've got Pereira as well, it looks like he's just going to be playing number 10 for Fulham. It's like, yeah, it's not the greatest thing ever, but he's on set pieces and he's there, and then maybe he's going to chip in. He comes on for 2 points. I mean, quite often, it doesn't matter who you are, you're going to score 2 points occasionally, unless your name's Reece James. So, yeah, just take it on the chin sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. I don't think there's anything else I need to add on Martinelli. Just the alternatives. I think Neto's also a good alternative in terms of value as well, so I wouldn't put you off getting Neto instead. But at the moment, I'm on Martinelli.
Cool.
Because they're a similar price, and I know Neto's popular. Mohamed Salah. He'll be my captain in the first week. I still think at 13 he's really good value, so there's no chance I'm going to go without him unless he gets injured. And he's done it for like years now, constantly being top scorer in the game. Even last season, like when he dropped off in like form, so to speak, and when he wasn't scoring as many points, his underlying data was still really good. And if you're of the mindset that Diaz is, there to cover him, that's just not the case. And even if you look at the data since Diaz joined Liverpool, Salah's outscored him. So Salah has 7.8 points per start, and Diaz has 5.4 points per start, and that's probably in a period where you'd perceive Mo Salah to be playing poorly post AFCON, or a lot of people would say that. So even despite that, he still outscored him quite significantly. So I would just say don't see Diaz as an alternative to Salah. See it as Salah versus other expensive players, in which case, in my opinion, because you only have to pay one more to get Salah over De Bruyne or Son, he's just a no-brainer for me.
Yeah, I'm just not even open to the discussion of not having him. I have gone without him in the past to be different for the sake of it. But as long as his underlying data is as good as it's been previously, then he stays in. And if he's 6 weeks in and he's not scored a goal, but his underlying data is ridiculous, then he'll still be in my team. I'm happy to say. I'm going to stick to my guns on it. And I don't think that's stubbornness, because at the end of the day, I trust in the underlying data and the numbers. So that's what I'll do. I don't envisage that will be the case. I think he scored today again in a friendly. Not that I say again, I think it's the first time. Not that matters, but it might be a reminder for some of the people out there. We've done it to death. He's not going anywhere from my team, at least yet, and at least the signs tell me any different.
Yeah, that's it. And that's I mean, I have nothing else to say on that, Luke. For me, it's pretty much a no-brainer. But Diaz is interesting. Because it's a price point a lot of people have been talking about in terms of that 8.0 price points. Because you've also got Saka at that price, you've got Mount at that price. I believe Foden is 8 as well, and then Bowen is 8.5. So I think there's loads of good
8 as well.
There's loads of good options at that price. One of the things I did consider was actually going for 2 number 8s. 2 number 8s. Sounds like I'm talking.
You're not setting up tactics. You're not a football coach, but calm down.
2 8.0 players, and then downgrading Jesus to a 4.5. But I don't like that because of the structure of only having one striker. Because if Haaland suddenly doesn't play a game, you've literally not got a sub to come on. So I don't like that. And the reason I'm going for Diaz is Liverpool's fixtures are so good, and the fact that Jota's out as well, and Diaz, since he's joined, has done really well. His underlying data is similar to players like Mount. Even though his expected minutes are less, it's the fixtures for me for Liverpool that really kind of swing that. But I think it's close. I think there are lots of good players at that price, and maybe that will change. I wouldn't be surprised if it does.
Yeah, I mentioned it last week. I think with Diaz and Foden, I'd feel slightly more comfortable personally of bumping their X minutes up a little bit, which then jumps them right to the top of the lists. The rationale is essentially that Diaz played near most of the games when he came in straight away. Mane's now been sold. I don't really see who will play on the left. I know Firmino has done that in the past, but it's been a while since he's been utilised in that way. So for me, Diaz has pretty much got a lockdown on the left-hand side. I'm not naive to the fact that, if he's playing poorly or Klopp wants to change it up or make subs and integrate, maybe he wants to integrate Núñez and he drifts Firmino over there or whatever, it could happen. But I just think for now, I don't really see a good reason not to have Diaz, to be honest. And if Jota was fit, I think you could still possibly make a case that way. But it's just that added sort of cherry on top where you think, well, if anyone else is going to play left, it's going to be him. Now, Jota could get fit 2 weeks in, and you could say, well, then that's a problem, and you've got a problem in your team, and I understand that. But I think if Diaz is starting the season and playing well, I don't see any reason why he'd start using him. We also have to bear in mind that Jota was primarily used as a forward in his recent time. That might not be the case anymore because of the Núñez-Firmino situation, but there's nothing to say that you won't just use him as a forward anymore. I mean, we just kind of... We try to make these patterns, don't we, in a team, and it makes sense to have Jota and Diaz as the left, and Núñez and Firmino as the 9, and then you've obviously got Salah pretty much on his own on his right, but they have got, I think Curtis can play out there and stuff, so...
Yeah,
it's like if you were playing Champ Manager yourself at home, that's probably how you'd set up your squad, but it's not necessarily what Klopp will do. He might use Jota as a centre forward. Yeah.
I played 2 number 8s, mate.
yeah. Okay. Well, let me know how you get on with that.
Another thing that just came to mind there, based on you saying that, is I don't think we saw it last season, but we've seen Liverpool play 4-2-3-1 before, and when they have played that, Firmino has played as that number 10. So maybe they'll do that more. Who knows? Maybe that's the reason they've kind of got 3 players that we think are primarily central players. But yeah, time will tell on that one, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. So centre forwards it is.
Yeah, I've gone for Jesus and Haaland, which I guess are the 2 what you call template picks. But I think they're template picks at the moment for a good reason, because they're good picks in my opinion. I just love Arsenal's fixtures, and I think Jesus is a really good signing. His underlying data was always really good at Man City, and his goal scoring was always really good when he did play. It's an interesting one because he's going from a team where, again, you'd expect him to get more chances because he's playing in a better team, but he's moving to a team where he's going to play more but get less chances. So his points per minute will go down, but his minutes will go up. And I think I expect him to play regular. I think that's the reason he's gone there, is he wants to play regular football. I don't think he'll play 38 games. But I think he's certainly a first choice player within that team. So I like his previous underlying data. I like Arsenal's fixtures. So it's fairly simple from that point of view. I would have really liked it if the kind of fixtures had thrown it up, and if like Mitrovic happens to have really good opening fixtures, or Solanke maybe, that would make me really tempted to go with one of them as another option, because I probably prefer them to any of the 6 million midfielders. To be honest, apart from Martinelli, if they had good fixtures, I think that would be really interesting, and that might make me more likely to go for a 4-3-3 or a 5, even a 5-2-3, I guess, or just play him instead of Jesus. But yeah, I think he's a really good option and template for a good reason.
Yeah, I don't have anything really to add to that. It's just the only thing is it remains to be seen really how he's going to work for Arsenal in obviously the competitive matches that we see in the Premier League. Is he going to end up being the foil for some of the other guys, like I've talked about in a certain system if he's playing as a 9? Didn't really work that well for Man City as a 9. They ended up putting him on the right wing. I can't really see that happening, but you never know, do you? Nketiah is a very useful striker as well. I think Arteta has talked about using both of them up front in certain games. He's obviously come from that Pep mindset as well of trying to work out attacking patterns that are going to benefit the team depending on the opponent. So we could see some versatility from Jesus, but that's really my only thing that I could say. Well, therefore it could affect him negatively. But at the end of the day, if the data's good on him, then I'm still happy to trust it. And quite similar to the Martinelli one, it's like I'd rather be on it and see what happens in the new team than the other way around and watch from afar. It's more money than I wanted to spend on that forward slot. But I don't see a good reason to go for any of the other ones like you've mentioned, mainly based off of fixtures at this point. But I'm happy to move that on a later point.
And if suddenly, say we get 6 games in and Nketiah has started 3 of them, and Jesus has started 3, that's where that early wild card could be really helpful. Or you can just make the switch then. And I like to think even with the fixtures, we probably still see returns from Jesus in that time anyway. Yeah,
I think someone said in the chat there, Prayesh has said, what happens to Nketiah now? Well, first of all, he is still quite young, and I don't think he ever fully established himself. He just played towards the back end when Lacazette was clearly leaving. But he was good. He was very good. His numbers were very good. What happens? I think, like I said, there's going to be horses for courses. Sometimes Nketiah and Jesus will play. But I also think if you look at the subs for Arsenal, I think Saka was one of the most subbed players in the league last season. So if Saka gets subbed off, he could bring Nketiah on and switch Jesus to the right wing, where he's also extremely comfortable. I can see that happening a few times as well. I do think Nketiah will get minutes, but will it impact Jesus' minutes? I guess we'll have to wait and see. I don't think it necessarily will.
Yeah, that makes sense. Should we move on to Haaland just to finish?
Yeah. I mean, he's been talked to death. Obviously, he's the brand new shiny toy. But there's been a little bit of doubt around him today, just simply because Pep's mentioned that he's not quite up to it. He didn't start the friendly. Had a few niggles, I think was the comment. And then I've seen something else that he's on an individual training package and all this stuff. I think they also said he's due to play Bayern. But he's newly signed to the league, newly signed to the team, I should say, relatively recently. So I don't know. I don't know how much to read into that. There's obviously the concerns, the fact that he's already had these injury problems in his career, and I think part of the reason, I don't know if you saw, but there's an article from Sam Lee, who's obviously a Man City correspondent, that says, I don't know how they know these things, but basically says that part of the reason why he's come here is he's been promised he won't get pushed if he needs to be, if he needs a rest, etc. But I don't know. I think if he's fit, he plays. So how do you know whether he's fit or not? Well, you have to wait until they tell us, basically.
And we knew that when he signed. I think that quote from Sam Lee is actually from the article when they signed him.
Right. Okay.
One of the main things that initially drew him to City was the fact that he would be rotated more, essentially, and they would manage his minutes more. So he considered one of the things that was less appealing about Real Madrid is that the fact he'd be more likely to be played in big games, even if he wasn't fully ready. But I just think if he's fit, and particularly at the beginning of the season, he's going to play. And I think we can just make that call after the Community Shield. Like, if he starts in that game and comes off after 60 minutes and he doesn't come off with an injury, like, I think we can expect him to start that first game, in which case I think you want to go with him if you expect him to start the first few games of the season, because he's just an unbelievable finisher, and he's joining the most creative team in world football, under the best manager in the world, probably. So I think I completely understand why people might end up going for Kane, but I think the reason for going for Kane should be if there's uncertainty around Haaland's minutes. I don't think we have that yet, even though we know he's had a niggle. If he plays the next game, I think we can be fairly confident that he's going to be ready in time for the first game of the season.
Yeah, and I'm just going to bring up this slide that I've got here from actually, it's from Sir Talp. I need to get this name right. Sorry, terrible at it. Sir El Talp is his name, as you can see in the bottom right corner here, video on the screen. Oh no, it's StatsBomb that I've got in the corner there. It's so small. Him and Chase combined, anyway, are great guys for data. It's actually Chase who provided this one for me, and he's taken the data from FBrief. Let me explain it for the pod. It's quite hard to explain just looking at it in general, because it's a shiny graph and they scare me, and I know they scare people on Twitter, but it's an over-under goals to non-penalty XG in the EPL and Bundesliga since 2017-2018. We've got the X and Y axis there. So on the X-axis, you've got the I can't say that word, non-penalty XG.
Cumulative.
Thank you, cumulative. Which is basically the amount of XG over that entire period that he has generated. So as you can see, Lewandowski's line is longer across the X-axis because he's generated more XG over that period, played more games, etc. 0 is almost the baseline. And we've got Kane and Haaland here. So on the Y-axis, we've got the non-penalty XG fluctuations, essentially, throughout that time period. So as we can see, Haaland is just consistently very, very good and overperforming, high levels of finishing. 11.8 more goals than expected from him, 28% overperformance, that is. I think this is why people are willing to chance him. Those are just ridiculous numbers. You can see Kane also very, very good, but even in the periods where he has obviously gone slightly better than Haaland, he's now dipped back down again, and Haaland's just been consistently extremely good, and obviously plays in a better team. So, and he's only at 12.8% overperformance. So it's almost like the reason people are willing to risk those minutes and the injury levels is because of that, basically, his sheer potential. And then people point the finger and say, oh, it's because he's in Germany or whatever, and that's why he's not managed to. I mean, that's why it's easier for him and all this business. That's why Lewandowski's included here, to show you that obviously he's a top-level striker, top-level finisher, and he's in Germany. As you can see, compared to the baseline, it's not only until towards the back end of it, that he started to regularly overperform. So it's not something like German keepers are worse or defence. It's nothing like that. It's just showing you that he also, is a human, essentially, and Haaland appears not to be from the data we've got. Can that change? And that's just because it's a shorter period of time and Haaland can come down a bit and stuff? Absolutely, he can do. Like, it doesn't say it won't, but everything we can see at the moment suggests that Haaland will continue to perform at least above the average that you'd expect, and he has done ever since. He's never dropped below. So it's a scary thought to me to not have him in that Man City team. Like, do I think that there will be, it's never works exactly like this. Like you said, the most creative team, the best finish, you put him in, Bob's your uncle, it's easy as pie. It could be. There might be some teething problems, but it's more the fear of if it does work, and even if there's a slight dip, we shouldn't be worried. That's the kind of message I'm getting across. It is very much, again, on the expected minutes with him, I think, is the only issue.
Yeah.
Is that what you draw from that as well?
Yeah, I agree with that. So the kind of key questions are, well, in terms of him overperforming his XG, the main difference there is the goalkeeper, isn't it? So the question you'd be asking is there a big difference between the shot stoppers in the
and how good of a finisher he is, yeah.
And how good the finish is, but that's not going to change. That's the one thing that could change between the Premier League is the goalkeepers. I mean, Alisson's exceptional, but outside of him, from what I've read in the replies to this on Twitter, there doesn't seem to be. Haaland's still ridiculous, even if you think there are slightly better shot stoppers in the Premier League. But yeah, the main thing when it comes to goal scoring is actually accumulating that XG, and I'm so confident he'll do that at Man City. So that's something I wouldn't be worried about. Like you said, the main thing for me is minutes. But if you think Kane's a better option, buy Kane. Honestly, you should not be. Don't buy players because you're worried about their ownership, because Haaland's ownership is ridiculous. If you think Kane is better and a better option, you should own him over Haaland. Don't let ownership be the reason for owning a player.
No. And I think there might be a sway in the community to start with Kane and then maybe move to Haaland when you're more confident on his minutes. I can understand that. Or just go with one premium option or another one, just Salah and spread the money. But then, it becomes a little bit of a concern if you want to try and get him in. And obviously it's just niggles and stuff. And game week 2, he's got an excellent fixture straight away where I'd really want him if he's starting. So for me, at the moment, he's still in my team and he'll remain there unless, like you say, Community Shield and further information tells me that he's not gonna play enough minutes to warrant me picking him. But yeah, it's just that overperformance, 28%. Can it consistently happen? We know that there are players out there that have managed to do it. Son is obviously one of them that we know of. There's other players like Messi. It's not like it's an impossible phenomenon that just won't happen. And then you look at Lewandowski, only 5% overperformance in the same league and still churning out those numbers. I don't think it's a thing about the league personally here. I can't wait to own him. I think it's going to be great. That's your team done pretty much, isn't it? Just the bench, which is kind of boring. But you've got Archer, which I've got in. I saw you talking about. I think he's going to get some minutes this season because he does look a really handy player.
He's an amazing player. So for a bit of context to anyone listening, I support Preston in the Championship, and we had him on loan for the second half of last season. So again, bear in mind there's probably a little bit of bias, but he did extremely well during that spell. He was one of the best strikers in the Championship, and since he's gone back to Villa, the consensus among Villa fans seems to be that they're going to keep him rather than send him back on loan again. And he definitely wouldn't go back on loan to Preston. If he was to go on loan, he'd probably go to a smaller Premier League team, or like, I don't know, maybe like Rangers, Celtic, that kind of team. Like he's Premier League ready, in my opinion. And yeah, I know Villa fans are very excited about him. So he's not going to suddenly be starting. But I think he's one that if there's a period where Ings is injured, for example, or Watkins, I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see regular minutes from him.
Yeah.
Or I wouldn't be surprised to see him. I think he'll regularly come off the bench, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him like score and then suddenly get a start. Like he's a huge talent, and he's done it for England as well this summer. For the I think he must be in the under-21s with England. I think that's his age group. Okay. He's done it as well and scored for them a few times recently. So just very talented player, basically.
Yeah, and I mean the 4.5 million forwards are pretty much dreadful this year. I think in terms of it doesn't look like you've got a starter amongst them, so you have to bear in mind the context. But I'm with you. I think if anyone, Gerrard seems to want to give youth a go. They've got lots of good young players at Villa. I think it makes sense to try and integrate them. And you're talking about a team that currently, as far as I know, have only got Ings and Watkins really plays up front. Ings has obviously got his injury record. Doesn't always work them two together necessarily. They've had struggles. And then Watkins can play left. So I can envisage a world where Archer gets a chance and maybe keeps it at some point down the line. But ultimately, he's just there because you have to pick a 4.5 striker in this setup, isn't it? And
and he scored the winner in the derby against Blackpool.
Yeah, but
I promise there are other good reasons to turn him as well, I promise.
Well, we had Harry Kane come. Was he 4.5? I think he was 5, actually. I think he might have been 5, but he came one season through and absolutely smashed it. So you never know. Maybe it could be Archer's season. De Silva and Pereira. I think there's not much to say there is. I think he's just easily the standout 4.5 mid to pick at the moment. Looks like he's going to play that role for Fulham. Who did they lose? Was it Carvalho they lost? I think he's going to play that role. seems to be taking some set pieces, seems like a bit of a no-brainer. I think he'll be in nearly everyone's team. De Silva's an interesting one. I've got him as well at the moment, but to be honest, I've just gone on what people are telling me. I don't really know too much about him. Is it the same for you, or do you have a feeling that he will get more minutes and stuff?
Can't say I've watched him play regularly or anything like that. It's just that his was just very. I just know he's very, very highly rated by Brentford fans and has performed really well when he has played. I believe he was in the team. Was he even in the team for the first few games of last season? I can't remember. Maybe he was even injured for that whole period, but out for months, and then eventually came back and played a couple of times towards the end of the season. But it's more just like you want a player that's going to get minutes, and there aren't many. We know that Pereira will get minutes. There aren't many at 4.5 we know will. But from chatting to people who support Brentford, so Tom from the FPL Dummies podcast, who I've chatted to, he thinks that he'll get minutes regularly, not necessarily from the first game, but thinks he'll probably become a semi-regular starter.
Okay. How concerned are you about your bench then? Because really, you've only got Pereira as the one that's probably going to play every game, and we don't know that, do we? It might not be the case, but it's a fair assumption, I think, that he's probably going to play most of the games for Fulham. But outside that, the other two could just not feature, couldn't they? So is that a concern?
Yeah, it is. There it is. It is a concern. So with that 0.5, I've used to go from a 4.5 up to Gabriel. I could just go for Dunk in that position, and then go for. But in fact, even then, there's not a lot you can do with that money, is there? Because there's not even a 5.0 midfielder or forward that plays. Now I think about it.
I mean, people have got Bailey at 5 million. People have talked about that, but I'm not sure he actually plays either, to be honest. But
yeah, maybe I'll consider that. But I just think that in general, I think the bench is I'm not that bothered about bench depth, to be honest. That you rarely use your first sub in a normal season, to be honest. We just used them quite a lot last season because of COVID. So in general, I tend to play the game with a very, very ropey bench.
Okay.
But yeah, I can see why people would want to have your boy Williams as well for 4.0. I can see that as a reason why you might go for 5 at the back, or 4 at the back, sorry, with him on the bench.
Yeah.
Because again, he's going to play regularly. So I guess it's a concern, but I would be more concerned with having a weaker starting 11. Well, that's where I've landed for now, anyway.
Yeah. Well, that's a nice segue, because we're going to very briefly touch on my team, which I'm going to bring up here, which you'll see is almost identical to Sam's. For the purpose of the pod, it's got Mendy in goal instead of Sanchez like him. I've got Cancelo, Trent Alexander-Arnold, Reece James, Doherty, Diaz, Salah, Martinelli in midfield, and I've got Solanke, Jesus and Haaland up top. My bench is pretty much exactly the same. I've got Pereira and De Silva, but I've got Nico Williams, like we were talking about, as my bench option. So really what I've done here is I've gone Doherty over Gabriel compared to yours. I personally prefer that at the moment. And then I really want Chilwell as well, but I think just because my bench was a little bit less strong, a little bit of concern around Chilwell and maybe his minutes with Alonso's there to begin with at least, I thought maybe I'll go for a nailed option in Solanke, which Review really likes. I mean, I'll hold my hands up. I didn't think that he would be an obvious pick, but I think he's accumulated something like 50% or something around there of Bournemouth's XG in the Championship. So I can see why the models might like him for that reason. And therefore I've got him instead of Chilwell, and that gives me the slightly better bench option, I guess, in a 4 million Nico Williams, and at least he will play. Whether he'll get any points is another matter, but that's it. It's allowed me to change my keeper. So that's the setup I'm on currently. I think I could do more in terms of moving Mendy to a 4.5 keeper, and then if I was actually to change Nico Williams to either Johnny or Dunk, the benefit there is obviously I've got a better defence cover. And also, he actually covers Solanke really well in the games that you'd want to bench him. So I think in his first few fixtures, Solanke's home fixtures are pretty good, but he's obviously got some pretty bad ones. I can't remember if they are. I think it's away to Liverpool and away to City or something ridiculous in the first few. But if you look at those fixtures, Brighton and Wolves have both got relatively good games at home. So I think that's why the model's got quite strong on Solanke, and then combining that with Johnny Otto from Wolves, because you can sort of work those two together. So that's something I could do to adapt it as well. But that's where I am for the moment until the FPL paid review model comes out. I don't see me changing that very often unless we get any news, outside Haaland just being completely broken down in training. I'm going to wait for the paid model and see how it changes. But overall, I'm fairly happy.
Well, one question would be for you, Luke, is that you tend to love having Man City players and you've only got 2. Is there any temptation to go for a Man City midfielder?
There is, yeah. So Foden over Diaz is something I could quite easily do. again, the only concern there is just that Foden hasn't been with the main group at the moment, which could mean absolutely nothing. He could be fully fit, and I expect him to get a high number of minutes. I think the benefit of Foden in that Man City team is the fact that if we think Haaland's not going to play, well, it doesn't mean Alvarez is just going to play up front. He's also brand new to the league. Of anyone, I'd say Foden's more likely to play a little bit there, and he obviously plays all three of the positions. So I think he's relatively fine. So yeah, he could come in. Also, there's the Cucurella thing. Like I said, I'm quite big on that. So if that happens, and we get the indication that he is going to start, then I could actually have him in over Doherty instead, maybe. So that's another consideration for me. So yeah, I'm not. I've had 3 City nearly all of last season, and I am inclined to try and do it again, given how good they are and how good the fixtures are. But we know the problem with them. It's the expected minutes, right? And that's where you can lose that. You can lose that battle on or win it, depending on how good you are at judging it, which is extremely hard.
I would. Yeah, I'm the same as you. Like, if I went for midfielder, it would be Foden. Maybe Grealish, but definitely not from game week 1, and definitely not Mahrez. I just think Mahrez so frustrating. He can. It's just it's the minutes thing. Like, he can haul and then suddenly be doing nothing. And he seems like a really attractive player to own because he's so talented and incredible to watch, and he's a brilliant footballer. It's so much of it comes down to minutes.
Yeah,
it's like a good taste. He's like a kebab, Mahrez. Well, the idea of him is brilliant, and then maybe it's incredible, like the odd time. But then the next few days, like, you feel awful afterwards when he's randomly benched for 3 games.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. To be fair, I do like Jack Grealish a lot. I think Foden's my number 1 pick at the moment. I think Grealish would be the next one, rather before I get to Mahrez. I just think when you add in the fact that penalties will probably be removed from him and go to Haaland, presumably when he's on the pitch anyway. It then just takes a little bit away from him. And we've just seen that there's been many times where Haaland's been set up to play every game or minutes or whatever it looks like it's set up for him, but Pep just doesn't particularly like using him in the league. Like, it's just a thing where he often starts off slow and uses him more in the Champions League and stuff in the big games. He's mentioned many times he likes Mahrez in the big games. In the big games, he likes to have him for his moments. And until I see any evidence that's changing, then I won't be having him. But there is definitely more chance for Mahrez now, given that he is the right side specialist and they've sold Jesus and Sterling. I get that, but I think we just have to wait and see it. I don't think you can make the assumption that therefore Mahrez just gets more minutes, unfortunately. Shall we move on to some questions then? I think how long are we doing for time? We're probably already over 45, aren't we?
Yeah, we're just over an hour.
Oh, Christ, every time. Every time. The 2 times we've done it so far. Let's move on to questions, try and answer them quickly. I apologise because they're on some sort of slideshow for me here and I could not work out for the life of me how to change it. So all of you guys are just getting some airtime and it's filtering through. So I'm just going to pick one at random and then we can talk about it. So let's go with FPL Naboo. So he says, how annoyed do you get when people equate going against EO to high-risk behaviour, even when said person has explicitly stated they think a lower-owned player will score more? So how annoyed do you get, Sam?
It's all relative, isn't it? I don't get annoyed as I do for other big things in life. But relative to FPL, I get very annoyed.
When you stub your toe, is that worse, for example?
Yeah, that's definitely worse. Yeah,
right, okay.
For sure, yeah. But yeah, how do I know? In the context of FPL, yeah, that does annoy. He's probably asked that because I rant about it on Twitter all the time. And I mentioned it before, like, you shouldn't own a player because of their EO. If you think they're going to score less points, don't own them. I think that's the way the game should be played optimally, in my opinion. I think people get worried, like, oh, my season could be over if I don't own this player who's got high effective ownership. But yeah, if they've got a high EO, like, maybe there's a reason for that, and maybe you should take more time to consider why that's the case, and maybe that makes you more likely to look into it. But then if you still come to the conclusion that another player is better for your team, or a different combination of players that they're not within, you should go against them. It annoys me, but yeah, it's relative.
It annoys me, but I'm fine for people to pay attention to it if they want to. That's the thing. Like, as in, I can't understand it, but if they want to follow it and do it, then I think it's making them worse. I think it's making them make worse decisions. Personally, I want to almost throw it back to them and go, okay, how many of the 10 million players that play FPL do you think are any good at this game for a start? You know, and then I want to throw it back to them and go, okay, I can already see it now by game week 2, game week 3. This % of the top 10k own this player. Well, how many players in the top 10k have ever been there before in their life, are any good at the game, have not just survived on luck? They own the player who's probably presumably done well to get them in the top 10k. When does it even become a factor where it matters? You know, you'd have to argue quite a long way into the season, and even then, every season on season, you don't know that the top 10k are actually particularly good at the game. They might have just been extremely lucky. We're playing a game of extremely high variance. So I don't really like that. I think following the review's elite sample of the 1k managers that we know are extremely good and basing decisions almost effective ownership against them would be a good idea. I don't think it would be a good idea in terms of sacrificing the expected value in terms of picking the best player, but I think it's good to fact check against it. You know, am I basically doing something that a lot of good managers think is not a good idea? But I don't think the general EO population, the general EO of top 10k is anything to worry about, personally.
Yeah, literally just worry about it in the last game week or two. And if you're trying to hold a position and you're like, say, like 50 points inside the top 10k, and that's all you care about is being top 10k, then just own a player that's really highly owned that everyone's going to captain. Just make sure you own them just in case.
Yeah.
And if you're chasing a 40-point lead in a mini league with 2 game weeks to go, like captain someone that's low EO, that even if you prefer someone else, just for the chance you might get lucky. But I think that's the only context.
Yeah. I'd also add that we only actually truly know the EO once the deadline's gone, don't we? I know we can have an idea, but from my limited knowledge of it, because I purposely stay away from it, is that it actually gives you the exact figures after the deadline's gone of what someone's EO is. So you can have a general feel of it, but you'll never know for sure until it's happened anyway. I think, like many managers said before, if you've got a decision where you've got 2 players and the expected points between them is extremely close, maybe it's like 0.1 in favour of someone else, then there's no reason to go for the person with extremely low EO because you're adding a bit of rank protection in there. I think that's absolutely fine. But the moment you start sacrificing a lot of expected value, or just because of EO, I totally don't agree with it.
Yeah, if it literally does feel 50-50, like, yeah, I can understand that, but just try and find that 0.1% to push you over to one player. New haircut or something.
In terms of how much it annoys me, I'll be honest, it makes me want to scream. Anyway, right, let's go for another one. Who am I going to pick out? Because they're all flying past me. Let's go for FPL Ron Manager. He says, do you guys think that because the timing of the first wildcard seeming to be fairly optimal, that for most informed managers there will be a fairly set template for Game Week 1 and post first wildcard? How can people develop an edge within that time period to beat the template if possible? Want me to go on that?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, I don't think he needs to worry, first of all, about template having an edge necessarily. I think it's always good to remind ourselves that the people who are heavily involved in Twitter and heavily involved in using analytics and FPL review and stuff are a very, very small minority of people. And you've already got an edge if you're doing that, I would say. I think this game doesn't always correlate with how much hard work you're putting in because it's a very high variance game, but there's a level, right? If you're putting literally none and you don't know anything and you're doing it compared to someone who's vaguely informed, then there's quite a big difference at that lower bracket. And so yeah, first of all, I think he needs to worry about that. I think he just needs to pick the best players and see what happens. But second of all, I will add that if there is an edge, and I've said it many, many times, it's expected minutes. I think if you can use the tools that are now at our disposal, such as FPL Review and various others, then your judgment of expected minutes is going to stand you in good stead. I showed you the good team. We looked at the good teams, how good they can be. If those players are, if Grealish is nailed on at 7 million in Man City's front three, how is that not a good pick? I mean, you don't need to be a genius, right? But you need to nail those expected minutes. So it's stuff like that, I think, that will set you apart. And that's incredibly hard to judge. You know, that comes from, for me, it's an understanding of, like, in your field around injuries. It comes more about understanding coaches, I think, as we develop. I think nowadays it's not he played this week, therefore he's going to play next week, all that stuff. It comes more from, can you get in the mind of this coach who wants to set up for this particular opponent? I think that is a factor. There's loads of stuff we're never going to know. We're not going to know about their quirks, you know, whether they're upset that day, whether the manager doesn't want to play him because he promised him some minutes for X, Y, Z. We're not going to ever get that information. So all we can really go on is, well, is this the tactical reason for him to play him, and is he fit and available? I think they're the two things we can look at, and we can try to make a judgment off of that. And you know, that's all I try to do with Man City, and I think there's loads of other people that pick for loads of other teams. So that's my answer.
Yeah, I don't need to add anything. I agree. I think it's a similar answer to the last one for me. Do what you think will get you the most points, not what you think will give you an edge. because there'll be plenty of times that you differentiate from everyone else across the whole season.
Absolutely. Here's one for you. So this comes from BMBRRRRR. That reminds me of that Bart Simpson episode. Was it on the chalkboard? We got the teacher RDRR. Is that just me?
I have no recollection of that.
I've probably made a fool of myself there. Look it up on YouTube. Bart Simpson RDRR. It's a maths equation. All right. Where are we? People are just assuming that 5 subs equal less injuries, but would this not make the pace of the game much quicker, thus increasing the likelihood of injuries for those who play 90, as seen in rugby, with more injuries since rolling subs was a thing? So I don't watch rugby at all. I didn't know that was a thing, but yeah. What do you want to say about
that? I don't know anything about rugby. Well, I like rugby, but don't know a lot about it at all. I say I like it, and I watch the Six Nations. That's about it. So I had to look this up, and it seems that it increases impact injuries, which are obviously way more common in rugby because of the speed that you're running at each other and the high impact of tackles. And so I guess that happens because you've got more of a mixture of fresh players and players who are more fatigued. So you've got more speed running at the player. In terms of football, that's not really an issue, I guess. Another theory that for why it might happen in rugby is because they can roll on and roll off more now. Players are more prepared for 60 minutes. So beyond 60 minutes, you also get more injuries with them not playing 80 minutes as frequently. Again, I don't think that's really going to be the case within football because teams are they're training to try and increase every player's extensive load, so the distance they can run, and intensive load, the amount of sprints they can do and repeat. Constantly over 90 minutes and up to 120 minutes in extra time. So your players always need to be ready for that. And then another thing I would say is, even if that was the case, I don't know how much of a difference it would make for FPL, to be honest. And in general, I think the whole thing with having the 5 subs now is probably I don't think it makes a huge difference. It just makes your bench slightly less important, basically, because all your players are more likely to appear. And you might see more patterns in players consistently coming off the bench who are annoying to own. But from my memory of when it happened in 2020 after the break because of COVID, it didn't make a huge difference. And often some managers didn't even use them, still used 1, 2, or 3 subs. So yeah, that seems to be quite rugby specific because of high impact. Collisions, which don't happen in football. It's not going to make you more likely to pull a hamstring, for example. Players always need to be prepared to play 90 or up to 120 minutes. So I don't think it will make a difference. But we'll see. We'll see. Only time will tell.
Yeah. I don't think people should panic either in the first few weeks because I think just generally the fitness levels of teams will be a lot less than where they want and they're trying to build people up. So I think in the first few weeks you might see subs utilised more because they want to, obviously they've been advised by their physio, this player should only be playing 60 minutes this week, etc. And now they're more able to make those decisions because they're not in fear of running out of subs throughout the game as often. So I think that will happen and you'll probably see people saying, oh my god, it's massively affecting. And I think come game week 4 or 5 when everyone's fit and available, the players are only going to come off essentially if they're injured or there's a tactical reason to do so. I don't think you just make 5 subs for the hell of it. I think you do it if you genuinely think a position's not working or for whatever reason, outside of injury, of course. So yeah, that's just my little take on it as well.
Yeah, just another random point on that people might find interesting. When you hear coaches now talk about subs to their players, this happens throughout youth levels. They don't say subs, they say finishers. They'll say starters and finishers.
Right.
And the idea is that you're prepared to finish the game, and you need to be prepared to come on for 20 minutes to make an impact.
Right.
So the wording makes it more seen as if you're not someone who just comes on as a replacement, but you've got a very specific role to come on. I think that's used a lot in youth football because it's very positive language, but is used at the first team level as well.
Yeah.
Just interesting fact.
Yeah, no, nice. Love that. Where are we? What question am I going to pick now? I've got one from Praz_FPL. He says Havertz as a genuine alternative to Jesus.
Not for me, just because I think they're both slight to minutes risks, and particularly with Sterling signing, you've got Sterling, Mount, Havertz, and still Werner. So one of those players is going to miss out. You've got Perisic and Pulisic as well, who can play in a front 3. So I would, for that reason, and I don't like his fixtures particularly, I would avoid him. But yeah, but it's not ridiculous shout by any means.
No, it's the alternative to Jesus. I don't think he's. I mean, variance again. He could be fine. He could do brilliantly. I think Jesus is a better pick. Havertz's data has been very good at times throughout his his short stay really in the Premier League. There has been times when it's been good when he's played that false nine. I think particularly in his first season towards the back end, it was very, very high. I don't doubt there's a very good player in there and he's got good data. So yeah, it could work, but it's the whole thing over Jesus. I just don't see him as a good option, so therefore I can't pick him. Later on, I'm open to picking him. I think he's fine if you've got him playing the 9, and the system is designed better, I would say, around the number 9, because Chelsea have a lot of difficulty seemingly to get that player functional in their team. Then yeah, I'm happy to take the punt at a later point, but not from the off, not from me. Let's move on. So I've got FPL throwaway. He says, how to maximise the use of models such as FPL review. What are their flaws that we should keep in mind? How to make best decisions based on the model's suggestions, recommendations. Practical examples would be great to hear. What's your thoughts there?
I wrote down 3 main things really. One practical example would be to edit the minutes yourself. I think a lot of people would use FPL review and they would go on and just look at the numbers. In fact, I don't know that, but I'm guessing. Like, I've definitely done that in the past. But I think editing the minutes yourself is a really key thing, because you might really disagree with the minutes on the website already there, and the numbers will adjust to that and will adjust a lot to that. So that's one thing you can do that's practical, that's really helpful. Bear in mind that like a really recent tactical change might not be picked up in data for a while as well. So say a new manager comes in and they instantly make a change in formation, and for example, we got a player suddenly playing out of position as a number 9 who previously was playing in midfield, something radical like that. That probably won't be picked up in the data like immediately straight away. So that's something you might notice that somewhere like an algorithm wouldn't notice or wouldn't be picked up in long-term stats for a while. And then the third thing would be that it still has the same limitations as XG does in terms of just contact on the ball. So you might have watched a game where a player, there's a ball across the 6-yard box, a player slides in, but they just missed the ball, and they're ultimately a millisecond away from a tap-in. But because they don't make contact with the ball, that doesn't come under XG. And I assume that doesn't get picked up as well by models who are taking into account a lot of that data. So that's just another thing to bear in mind as well, and just to be aware of.
I absolutely love that. I think I'm still, in terms of me answering this question, I'm still learning. Like, I found out about FPL reviews last season. I kind of used it a little bit to sort of fact check bits and pieces, but this season I plan to use it a lot more. And I think there's other things like the decay level. We haven't even discussed this for people who won't know what review is or how to apply it. There's stuff like decay in there, which I think we can discuss on another podcast. I think if you can utilise that well, then that could help you fix to strength. Obviously, how long is your horizon? How many weeks are you looking at? Are you looking to save transfers for the 2 free transfers, which I think is quite a powerful tool. There's lots of things that you can use to make you better, I think, and I plan to do that as we go along and learn how to do that. I would just say as well that in terms of the flaws, like you've said, first of all, any of that stuff could be built into a model. Like, it depends. It obviously is human input. If you wanted a model to be more reactive to the most recent week that has happened, for example, you could do that. You can use solvers and stuff to do that as well. I think it's a good thing they don't react to last week's points very, very quickly in general, because otherwise you're going to go down far too many wrong paths. And yeah, that's where the judgment, I suppose, can come in, like you say. I think Gundogan was a good example a couple of seasons back for Man City. You never had it historically. Suddenly Kevin De Bruyne was out, I believe, and he was playing like almost in a false 9 position. That's your favourite term again there, Sam. Or at least running into the box, being the last man on the end of it. His data started going up very quickly. He started performing, getting points. Ultimately, people brought him in because he was getting points. But his data took a while to creep up, and then it was very, very good, and then the models will recommend it. So sometimes there might be a little bit of a delay there. But like I say, you could build that into the model if you really wanted to. It's just it would probably have some knock-on effects. So there is always going to be some benefits, I think, outside of the models at this point, because they still are very much in their infancy. Like, they are fantastic, but they're only going to get better with time, I think. And right now, tactical movements and shifts of a player obviously can be something that you could pick up on quite early. You just have to be wary that you might be seeing something that you're not, isn't translating in the data, and it's actually only a 1 or 2 week thing before it switches back. So it's a tricky balance. Let's move on. I think we've got one more tweet, and then we can
last one
call it. Yeah, let me just check if I've got that right. I think
it's the one about Man City, I believe, Luke.
Oh, is it? Okay. Oh, yeah. In my opinion, who will be the Man City beneficiaries of the 5 subs rule and who will suffer? It's so hard to answer that right now, but I don't think there'll be that much of a change in terms of the who will suffer, because Pep often won't make subs if he's happy with what he's seeing on the pitch. I don't see that changing, like I mentioned, because there's suddenly 5 subs, maybe very early on for the fitness. So I don't think there's necessarily going to be people that suffer. I think Kevin De Bruyne could be one, because he's very important to them, and if they're winning a game 4 or 5-0 and you've got the option to take him off, then why not? Pep has mentioned that in the past. If we needed to win, I think he said then Pep would be staying on when he took him off one time. So maybe he's one that could slightly suffer. Obviously, Haaland being managed, we've already talked about. Will he come off early? I think he's another one, maybe. But it's speculation. In terms of beneficiaries, the only thing I can say is if Pep does decide to use subs, then I think a lot of the younger kids will get more of a run out, which they don't really get. So the likes of Alvarez, Palmer, I think that's still probably going to come in games where they're 4 or 5-0 up to begin with. But yeah, I just think if anything, it's the beneficiaries will be the peripheral players. Palmer at 4.5 million. I've seen a few people mention maybe they might have him in his team. I mean, for me, that's a no, because it takes a Man City spot. But he's certainly a very good price if he was to. We know about Mahrez, and I think Pep has mentioned that he was open to using Palmer there. Is it out of this world that Palmer could nail down a bit of a role on the right wing? He is a very good player, maybe, but certainly not right from the beginning anyway.
Yeah. Great.
I think that's it. I think we've gone well over our target again, but I think we've covered everything we wanted to cover. Sorry if we didn't get to your questions in the chat, guys, but we tried to pick up what we could as we went along. Do you want to do the outro for us, Sam?
Well, we aimed for 45 minutes and we've done an hour and 20, so 35 minutes added on for injuries and stoppages. But if you listen to it on 2 times on the podcast, it'll be about 45 minutes. Everyone does that, right?
God, if they listen to me at 2 times, they'll never hear what I'm saying. I talk way too fast.
Well, hopefully you guys enjoyed it. We're looking forward to the next one and seeing how our drafts change up until the season starts. Thanks for listening as ever, and please head over to our Twitter, give us a follow, give us a subscribe on YouTube as well. We'd appreciate that, and give us a rating or like the video on YouTube.